emergency for the first time in America.
This is Jeff, and
receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 124.IS6517, certificate number 34308. Biosphere 2.
Hey! The snow's out here!
Oh, God, here we go.
This thing's... Olivia, what's with the door? It's not open.
Of course it won't open. That door won't open again for an entire year. Nothing comes in, nothing goes out, not even air. It'll take a Sherman tank to open that door.
So what you're saying is...
You can't get out.
We're stuck here.
Yes.
For 12 months.
That's right.
12 months?
52 weeks.
Yes.
385 days?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So what you're really trying to say is...
Now, you know what the Biosphere 1 is, don't you?
The funny thing is, I didn't at the time. When I was hearing all the news about Biosphere 2, I was in junior high, I want to say, when it started making the news. And it was really treated like the moonshot. Like on cable news, this was a big and exciting scientific endeavor for our new desert astronauts.
That's right. And you just assumed, I'm guessing, that Biosphere 1...
Yes, was like some earlier prototype or failed version or one that I had missed because I was too young. And I think I only learned a few years ago what Biosphere 1 is.
Which is?
Earth. Like we're living in Biosphere 1.
That's right. That gives you a sense of the kind of aesthetic of the people behind Biosphere, that they wouldn't want to call it just Biosphere 1 because there was one already.
Also maybe hubris. Like, you like Earth, but check out our sequel. Like, we have improved.
You're absolutely right, though, that it was a major event, cultural event, and people without hyperbole did describe it as equivalent to the race to the moon.
Really?
Yeah, because it was an enormous undertaking, and it was assumed to be maybe the next step in our evolution.
Well, the thing about going to the moon is it's very hard to get there. It's not so hard to walk into a series of tents and domes in the Arizona desert. On the face of it, it seems a little less adventurous.
It seems a little summer campy, but the idea of sealing the doors and really building the biosphere so that it had an unprecedented level of sealedness from the outside, so that it was a structure that set all kinds of new standards for the degree to which there was no transference of air or any other kind of substance from inside and out. And the idea that you could create a self-sustaining ecosystem within a closed structure was as hard, if not harder, than building a rocket and going to the moon.
Well, we'll back up here for a future audience for whom needle scratch sound. You're probably wondering how I got into Biosphere 2. Like, imagine a future audience for whom Biosphere 2 is just, for whom our time is also a ruined, failed biosphere in the desert.
Right.
Biosphere 2 was what and where? Paint the picture for us.
Well, Where it was is easy to say. It was built basically on a 3-acre plot in a place called Oracle, Arizona. It was built over the course of several years from 1987 to 1991. And it was a private venture to build a habitat which could support a population of humans independent of any kind of like transfer of material from Earth.
The idea is it would be utterly sealed off. What happens in Biosphere 2 stays in Biosphere 2, including respiration.
You would including respiration. So you would imagine it as basically a space station, but still on Earth, just in case everything went crazy wrong.
And that's what we were supposed to envision, right? That if this works, you can put it on the moon, you can put it on Mars.
When it was initially conceived, it also still was in what we now know to be the waning days of the Cold War. But at the time, that wasn't clear. 1987, I mean, this was conceived over many years before. It still seemed possible and maybe even probable that some population of human beings would need to survive in a very polluted and toxic environment on Earth. We think about it as a science fiction thing or something from Dr. Strangelove, where a group of high-ranking military and government people would retreat to some underground cavern. But that would only sustain a population for a very short amount of time before the food ran out and the oxygen became impure.
Well, we're doing okay in our bunker here.
Right.
But we certainly don't have the natural beauties of Biosphere 2.
And we also, we do go out and hunt. We hunt washing bears. And
we still have your half a side of beef from when you conned your elementary school.
But this was very similar to our underground bunker, kind of posited as the first stab at building a spaceship of some kind where human beings might survive a cataclysm and either populate space or survive throughout a cataclysmic event and then reemerge to terraform desertified Earth.
What would the cultural markers have been back then for like kind of the megalomaniacal Bond villain plan to like have this kind of an arc? It's in Moonraker, right?
Right.
The guy's got his little orbiting Eden.
Right.
Hugo Drax. Are there other what are the other fictional predecessors of Biosphere?
I mean, a lot of government work went into building non-fictional attempts at it, but the difficulties in creating a small scale functional, what is effectively an organism, which is to say, a habitat is an organism. And this was during a period where this idea, this mentality that Earth was a spaceship was, if not in its infancy, certainly in its, we're still in a period of kind of formulating that consciousness.
We're still reckoning with it. And
a lot of people on Earth still reject the hypothesis.
But it was kind of faddish in the 70s, right? This new idea, the Gaia hypothesis. That,
Earth Day began in 1970, and during the announcement of Earth Day, the idea of spaceship Earth was, certainly not introduced, but referenced, quoted. It was, and a lot of that Earth as a single organism was also commingled with the idea that there could be a United Nations, a one world government.
Right.
It was one planet, one people.
We're all in this together.
Right.
Where else would we go?
Buckminster Fuller popularized the idea. Although it existed back to the 19th century.
Well, it's certainly accentuated by the astronauts. Like every American astronaut looking back into space would just suddenly turn into a blubbering little pile of the Vienna sausage gelatin. And
as they wept at the
they
beauty
should
of
have
Earth.
sent a poet. If you could just see it from up here, God, there's no borders. It's just one beautiful breathing thing in the vast. Because they're really confronting how vast and uninhabitable everything else is, you know?
Right.
And you see this thin web of life, I guess, from that perspective, and you think everything we do is a huge misguided waste of time, basically. It's so fragile.
And you're right. I mean, the astronauts were all Navy pilots, and we were asking them to interpret this metaphysical experience for us in terms of.
Are you saying if you had a question about metaphysics of the universe, you would not first go to a
lieutenant colonel a lieutenant commander?
I have questions about the meaning of life. Well, roger that.
Let me just roll back the throttle here. Well, a poet seemed to be maybe exactly what we needed. And that brings us to a man no less than John Allen, who was initially trained as a metallurgist and was working.
Is he a time traveler? He's a metallurgist.
He's a metallurgist.
In the 80s?
No, in the 50s.
Oh, he's an older guy.
He's an older guy. He's sort of came of age in the immediate aftermath of World War II. And during this period, he became kind of a union organizer within the company where he worked as a metallurgist, and then gradually became, through the sort of left-wing politics of unions, became radicalized, increasingly radicalized. And during the early 60s period, that meant that he potentially, I mean, during the early 60s, you could be a metallurgist and then a union organizer, and at some point along the way, take LSD.
You could be a hippie metallurgist.
All of a sudden,
why not?
Your life turns around. But he did become a kind of early adopter of the foggy realm in between hard science and new age conception.
Was it kind of fueled by eco concerns? Was he an early environmental guy? That's the right period for that.
He was in some ways a classic sort of almost Gump-like character, although not.
Who did he hang out with?
Not really.
Did he meet like Louis Armstrong or something?
Not really Gumpy, but in fact he did. In 1963, he decided that he was going to travel the world, and this was an era of high adventure of this sort. And so he went off on a kind of, I mean, what you would maybe describe as a hitchhiking adventure. He went to traveled all around Africa. He went to Uzbekistan and Afghanistan, India, Nepal, Burma, Thailand, Malaysia.
I thought you were going to say like Colorado. This is very ambitious for this guy.
It was, and here's a quote from his Wikipedia, which we never consult in the process of doing this show. But I thought that this was an elegant sort of condensation of his trips. He mixed with the Berbers and the avant-garde literary coterie in Tangiers. He set up a painting studio in Fez. He hitchhiked from Tangiers to the pyramids. He lived with the tribal chiefs in Sudan. He traveled with the refugees to the Rann of Kutch in India and Pakistan.
I don't know where the Rann of Kutch is.
Well, we'll save that for a future episode of the Omnibus.
We haven't done any Ranns of anything.
He lived on a junk in Tonkas with the Hong Kong boat people. He worked as a journalistic stringer on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He basically took in every kind of National Geographic destination that you could find in 1963. But while in Tangiers, he became well acquainted with William S. Burroughs and Paul Bowles, and became kind of integrated in that beat period expatriate community that was, experimenting with literary ideas of multiculturalism and again a kind of a premise that a mix between European colonial culture and ancient traditions could produce some greater understanding of both.
Do you see yourself in this guy? You traveled the world in your youth. You were in North Africa with the Berbers and the coterie.
It's true, and I was pursuing a similar kind of revelation. I mean, the first time I was in Tangiers, Paul Bowles was still alive.
I was going to ask.
And I knew a girl who, like a girl I was pretty well acquainted with, that knocked on his door and became part of his entourage for a time. Made trips on his behalf to Europe, became, not maybe his intimate, but perhaps even that. She certainly was a radical.
Do you think that, you think if you'd had different hashish or whatever, you would have come up with building a glassed-in Epcot-looking ecosystem in the middle of the desert?
Well, I didn't find in that in rubbing shoulders with the Beat Generation that it resonated quite with me in 1989 as it did with people in 1969.
You were a little late.
Well, a little late and a little bit maybe jaded by what I saw as the aftermath of those first experiences. But John Allen really put his money where his mouth was, and started to write poetry, started to write novels. He throughout the 60s he wrote all kinds of sort of adventurous literary sort of beat influenced works under the pen name Johnny Dolphin.
Johnny Dolphin.
Johnny Dolphin.
Did he have a Saturday morning cartoon show? That doesn't sound like a beat poet.
Good old Johnny Dolphin, writing some like hipster scat poetry.
He does sound like an animated character who's like some Captain Planet type who's going to find the evil industrialist and shut down their polluting new factory.
Well, and if you think about that kind of cultural amalgam of someone who, and I guess amalgam would be an apt word for a metallurgist who became a hippie philosopher, but at the time there weren't the same kind of negative associations with New Age as being something that was intrinsically unscientific. And you could in a sort of Timothy Leary environment, if a Timothy Leary biosphere, you could kind of posit these New Age theories using scientific understanding as a backstop for it. I mean, the idea that DDT was being consumed by raptors and making their egg shells so thin that they couldn't reproduce was a novel concept, and it spoke to the idea that ecosystems were interconnected, and if that were true, then sort of a butterfly flaps its wings in China, and it has effects on potentially like the viability of the human race.
Sure, like chaos theory is one area where new agey sounding ideas actually turned out to be good and complicated mathematics and science.
Right.
And maybe if the new age people had just gotten a better press agent, we wouldn't be so quick to discount stuff that sounds like that today.
Well, and I think what New Age suffered from, it's a lot of people that didn't have scientific rigor in their thinking and brought in a lot of stuff that couldn't be demonstrated.
Plus the music was lousy.
But there was it depends on how you feel about the music of the Spheres.
I hate the music of Biospheres.
I think the attempt to integrate the beliefs of ancient cultures as if there were some lost wisdom there also introduced a lot of spiritual, pseudoscientific kind of, mescaline influenced, but revelations.
Like we should have stuck with the plants that actually cured something instead of the plants that just made you see newly invented colors. But
John Allen, again, being a person who really did the work, he opened a place called the Synergia Ranch in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And Santa Fe has always been a mecca for people that are, living under copper tubing pyramids, and but also writing beat poetry and doing pretty clever paintings of vaginas. It's a counterculture locust.
The last time I was in Santa Fe, I was listening to a seminar by a guy who goes into the desert and finds like very soft sandstone, like half sand, half sandstone, and just digs these amazing cathedrals into the earth. Just him and his little metal tools. He scratches out these giant grottos. And I thought, this is exactly what you come to New Mexico for this guy.
Kumbaya. So the Synergia Ranch was attempting to do actual biology, actual sort of groundbreaking work in developing kind of ecologically sustainable agriculture. So this was also a period of big ag in the rest of the developed world.
And you're starting to get your first pushback to that. You're starting to see some of the downsides.
Well, what's interesting is that industrial-sized agriculture was producing incredible results globally. I mean, we were facing global famine at a certain point, and it was industrial-scale innovation in pesticide, and fertilizer,
new plant hybrids.
That's right, in the biology of plants, that suddenly meant that we were getting a tremendous increase in productivity of land, but there was a lot of pushback as we realized that pesticides went into the ecosystem and didn't just disappear; they started killing things downstream, and hybrid plants then pollinated outside of the confines of the fields where they were planted. It started to have reverberative effects over the whole ecosystem.
We've talked many times on the Omnibus about kind of the dawning realization that it's not, our biosphere is not just an infinitely absorbing pool that just sucks everything up and can fix anything, that it's finite, that stuff can be exhausted, that stuff can be permanently screwed up. It didn't occur to anybody before the 20th century.
No, and in fact, the original conception of spaceship Earth, the way it was described in writings of the 19th century and early 20th century, was that it was inexhaustible. And it was only during this period that we started to realize, because this was the very end of the age of exploration, right? John Allen is traipsing around the world, but there no longer really was terra incognita in the same way.
The spaceship metaphor is much stronger if it's actually limited.
And we were actually trying to survive on spaceships and realizing how fragile,
right?
How small and how confining and how desperately connected to Earth we were. Allen then in the mid-'70s founded the Institute of Ecotechnics, which was, again, like a pretty novel approach to combining technology research and ecology research. Does
he actually he's a metallurgist. Does he actually have a degree of any kind?
He does. John.
He is a man of science of some kind.
He is. So he was, let's see. He's a member of the Royal Geographic Society. He's, let's see here. He worked for the Corps of Engineers as a metallurgist. He has a degree from the Colorado School of Mines. He has a master's degree in business administration from Harvard Business School.
Whoa.
That's right. He has a certificate in advanced physiological systems for engineers from the University of Michigan. And
so he's got academic credentials.
He also studied anthropology and history at Northwestern and wrote some papers at Stanford. So he's
not just an autodidact weirdo.
He's
deeply connected to these different academic disciplines.
He is, and at a time when it was still, I think, maybe more possible than today to, it was an era of breaking out of silos and becoming kind of polymathic and finding respect within the culture. And that's never been really respectable within mainstream or traditional culture, right?
Well, you can see why. Like if you're a generalist, then any given specialist only understands 5% of what you're saying. It's very threatening to a specialist to deal with people who are outside the silo.
Right, and our culture prefers an expert, rather than someone who is, because I think if you pursue generalism to its logical conclusion, you become a philosopher,
and you know nothing.
Right.
The generalist knows a little about a lot of things, but the next step is philosopher, knows nothing about everything.
And I think uncertainty is a key element to be truly educated, and you can be a specialist, and if you're sufficiently siloed, experience no uncertainty,
deep surety about everything you say.
And the more broadly educated you are, the more uncertainty is introduced.
Oh yeah, I'm not against uncertainty.
No.
I say that with admiration to philosophers.
I know
that they know what they don't know.
I'm very uncertain about your relationship to uncertainty. But the Institute of Ecotechnics was kind of part and parcel of a global kind of movement during the early 70s, right? You had Jacques Cousteau, you had NOAA doing all kinds of weather research about the formation of cyclones and cloud seeding, and there was a ship associated with the Institute of Ecotechnics called the Heraclitus.
Ooh.
And they roamed the earth. They went around the world on 3 separate round-the-world voyages, sailed up the Amazon, and they weren't just doing science study. They were doing ethnographic study.
Oh, wow. So there's also drums.
That's right. Meeting people and recording their stories and chasing humpback whales, and really a holistic idea about what science was.
It sounds like this guy just wants to be on a boat talking to Amazonians and looking at river dolphins, and he's willing to reverse engineer whatever. So I don't know how this gets funded, but
and they were also doing things like planting, tree replanting. They planted 40,000 new trees in Puerto Rico, and we're trying to do eco work. Well, all of this led up to, and this is very much all centered on the Synergia Ranch. It led up to the idea of creating a biosphere, an enclosed experiment where a lot of these ideas, a lot of this research would be put into practice. They and their cadre had accumulated a considerable amount of data about how these systems worked and how they interacted. And the proof of concept would be to build a system that functioned, that made enough oxygen, that sequestered enough carbon, that recycled waste and water to the degree that it didn't build up toxins and become a death bubble.
He seems like somebody who's very devoted to his connection to Earth, and it's interesting that his impulse here is to break that connection. Like he's not some Carl Sagan type, always on the horizon guy who's thinking about the 21st century and Mars. This guy goes from planting trees in the Amazon to trying to cut himself off from the biosphere altogether just to see if you can.
Well, because I think he hoped that research would then allow us to see our own biospheric system,
understand the connections better.
That's right,
and preserve them.
But he did make a mistake which I'll get to in a second. The Biosphere project was one that was going to require a lot of. It was going to be a big project, and he partnered with a man who had spent some time on the Synergia Ranch, who happened also to be a billionaire by the name of Ed Bass. And Ed was a kind of Texas guy who inherited a lot of money and was good at money, but also found a lot of the ecological sort of environmentalist research. Found it very appealing. It was in his nature to pursue, and he's a
philanthropic guy. He's looking to do good with the money,
right? And he was intrigued by the Synergia Ranch. One of the things I hadn't mentioned about John Allen is he also founded a traveling theater company and used theater as a way of introducing these notions into other cultures. The company was called The Theater of All Possibilities.
Oh no! So these poor South Seas Islanders or whatever had to watch him do marionette shows.
Yeah, right. And I think in 1969 that would have seemed a lot more revolutionary and have a lot more potential to again communicate with cultures that had non-scientific backgrounds. This was a way of communicating through puppets or mime.
And I guess it's new, so it doesn't seem flaky to them. It just seems idealistic. Can you imagine? I kind of wish I was a person who could see all this stuff as idealistic instead of flaky.
And there still are, and I'm sure even there are some futurelings who are saying, "What are you talking about? The music of the spheres is real." But it was. And this was also a time when cultural anthropology hadn't lost its sheen of rigor and interest. So the Theater of All Possibilities also appealed to Ed Bass, and Ed Bass. No, he was the guy from the.
How low can you go?
Ed
Bass? You were saying Bass before.
I was. I think it's Ed Bass, but wasn't Ed Bass one of the New Kids on the Block?
You thinking of Rob Bass?
No, Rob Bass is that's my father's name. So together they put together a business venture called Space Biospheres Ventures, or SBV, and with the idea that a privately funded sort of incorporated science business could build the biosphere, not especially with the idea of profiting monetarily from it, but more in keeping maybe with Elon Musk's space program, a thing where it felt like this is what an energetic billionaire would invest his money into. There's
also a real godlike appeal to creating a competing biosphere. Like if you can start that flywheel going and create essentially a sustaining sealed Earth and life web,
Futurelings may worship at the temple of Allen and Bass.
No one else has ever done that before, beyond whatever creator you believe in. Think what an ego trip! What an aesthetically pleasing thing to be able to set that in motion.
Well, and if you sit here and reflect on it for a moment,
I will.
It is it's incredibly appealing even to picture being, for instance, one of the pioneers of it. We're now talking in our culture a lot about a manned mission to Mars, and a lot of the talk around the manned mission to Mars is not just about how to create a self-sustaining community, but also a self-sustaining community where people don't return to Earth. And a lot of people even people we know have put their names in as potential Martian astronauts.
I'm willing to go and not come back.
Yeah. And people, friends of mine have surprised me with their willingness to be at the bleeding edge of that.
You're like, really? What? You don't want to know how Game of Thrones comes out?
Like, what about your kids and stuff? And they're like, they'll be grown.
That was a big part of Biosphere, though. I remember, you would have the Right Stuff thing about the new pioneers, the Biospherians, walking down the hallway in slow motion, ready to enter their new life.
Well, and this is what captivated the public imagination. And in 1991, 8 Biospherans dressed in Biosphere jumpsuits.
It's always jumpsuits. See, this is how I know they got it from Bond movies.
They entered the first Biosphere, and
the second Biosphere. They were already in the first Biosphere.
You're right. They went from the first Biosphere to the significantly smaller second Biosphere.
Yeah, they're really trading down.
The idea of the Biosphere was that it would have the following components: a rainforest, an ocean environment,
That's ambitious.
a mangrove swamp.
Well, you got to have a mangrove. I've been house hunting. You got to have a mangrove swamp.
Well, and actually, I've been looking at a place that has a little mangrove swamp. It's pretty appealing.
Is that true?
Yeah. Well, and it's right next to a savanna environment too, so you really get the best of both worlds. There was a fog desert environment.
Oh, right, like the Atacama, where it doesn't rain, but the moisture comes in off the ocean, and that sustains succulents and things.
Right, and then an area for human. There's a kitchen and some bedrooms and
a club. It's a pinball
a little
machine.
bit of a club. Yeah, there's a gaming room,
it's a cafe,
kind of like your TV room in the basement of your house.
And they really think they can squeeze all these, like on Earth. One of the things that powers all these things is they get, you get vast square miles of rainforest and vast square miles of ocean, but they think that you can just put it 20 feet away and it'll work.
Right. If you look at Biosphere 2, it does have several kind of different habitats that are connected through tunnels. I mean, they're meant to interact with each other, but also keep a kind of discreteness from one another. There was built into the structure were a couple of buildings that could expand and contract, because in the
an accordion.
Well, they were called the lungs of the building.
They wouldn't expand and contract every 5 seconds like an actual lung.
No. But in the course of a day and night, you would have the sun would cause an expansion of the air, and
you're going to have that, because there's nowhere else for it to go.
Right. It was they pioneered kind of a novel construction technique, one that created, as I said before, the most completely sealed building ever constructed, where there really was not. I mean, there was necessarily a small bit of transference of air from inside and out, just because you couldn't hermetically seal a structure that large. But it created the least amount of permeability up to that point.
This is the dream of dads everywhere who have ever been like, close the back door. I am not paying to air condition the backyard.
Well, and air conditioning, I mean, you needed to create it was a
one problem is you're putting all this in under the Arizona sun, right? So,
and this ended up being part of the problem, because we, in order to create oxygen and food, you needed the effects of photosynthesis, but also you could create just a magnifying glass that just burned everyone like an ant. So the glass
is that what happened? All the Biosphereans died immediately the first time the sun crossed the glass roof?
No, they glazed the glass and in order to try and make it
seems hot,
slightly less hot. But what that ended up doing was letting less light through to photosynthesize, and so the plants didn't produce the oxygen that maybe it was predicted they would.
On paper.
Some of the environments didn't flourish more than others. The rainforest did well, but it didn't. The sunlight wasn't sufficient to penetrate down to the bottom layer, so it didn't have a kind of, it didn't have the ferns at the bottom they thought it would.
They probably planted all this stuff and had to watch it die, huh?
Well, there was a lot.
They weren't starting from bare ground like God did. They brought in stuff from a nursery in Phoenix.
Right. It was there were challenges of all kinds. For instance, condensation within the building meant that the desert kind of turned it was a little wetter than they expected, and so the desert it became more of just a wetter desert, whatever a desert is that gets periodic rain.
Prairie?
Yeah, something. I mean, the savanna and the desert became less distinguished from one another. They imported a lot of species. There were
animals.
There were pygmy goats. There were little pigs.
They should have been naked. That's my take on the biosphere. The biospherians should have been naked.
They shouldn't have. But after they closed the door, who knows what they did? And a lot they did what's called species packing, which is they knew that there were going to be some die-offs, and so they put more species in there with the expectation that they wouldn't all survive.
I see. So you start at a high level, and everything instead of bulking it up, it dies down to whatever the right curve is to get the life cycle.
Right. There were chickens. There were, there was a lot of I guess what you would call protein.
Imagine the goats signing up for this. Like, are you sure you want to sign up for it? Yeah, no, but what you got kids. You're
never coming back. Oh, you've got kids. Boo.
But yeah,
I'm giving you a lot more bells than you deserve.
It says 35. I don't think the bell is a reward. I thought it was a punishment. 35% of the goats are going to die. It's in the no. That's fine. I'm going to give it a shot.
What ended up happening was all the mammals died.
Oh, soon?
Well, I mean,
how long did this? I actually don't remember the contours of it. How long did it actually run?
This was meant to be a 2-year experiment, and I'll explain. Unfortunately, they introduced an ant species that outcompeted all the other ants and became a kind of invasive pest.
Super ant. Somehow
cockroaches got in and proliferated.
So you try to seal it, but...
Well, I think what happened was they sealed some cockroaches in.
This happened to God, too. Earth gets created, and then new DNA comes in on meteorites, and that's probably us.
Well, yeah, and you get bad cowboys. I mean, I don't think God intended that there would be skateboarders, but here we are. They're everywhere. One of the other complications was that it was a corporation, and although it was headed by a kind of this idealistic person in the form of John Allen, he made some mistakes in how the publicity around it went. We who were watching it on CNN and excited about the prospect imagined that this was almost a contest. The people that went in and were sealed, this needed to be a kind of, for it to be a success at all, it needed to be complete. It needed to succeed in its intended mission. John Allen very publicly early on described it as a refugia.
Like Synergia, but for refugees?
Well, as a place for people to survive an apocalypse. And that created a lot of hostility to the idea because it seemed like a rich man's...
Yeah, the implication is everyone else will die.
Right. And if you can afford to build yourself a Biosphere 2, that you have a chance of living. And it really alienated the media, who were incredibly critical of Biosphere 2. They watched it like a hawk to make sure that they didn't violate their own premise.
I mean, rich people do build their own biosphere like Edens. I mean,
sure.
Is it jumping ahead to point out that Jeff Bezos has used some of his Amazon billions to build one right in the middle of central Seattle?
Well, I mean, the entire nation of New Zealand is infected with a plague of American billionaires who have decided that New Zealand is the one
most
place
likely to survive.
And so they move there and buy these massive estates where they build their apocalypse bunkers, and they have helipads built into their San Francisco office towers that will take them to their weird global hovercrafts or whatever. I mean, there really is a kind of billionaire prepper community now.
I've been in Jeff Bezos's balls. Right. his big glass kind of.
I've been to his space thing.
I know you've been to his space. Have you been to the balls yet?
No, they won't let me in the balls.
You got to go in the balls.
I have a friend that works for Bezos that says he can get me in the balls.
I think now it's open one day a month or something. I was doing
I don't want to be there with others.
I was there with others. I was doing a benefit for the library. But yeah, it's a big terrarium for people, and he lowered a giant fig tree into this big glass biosphere thing, and he broke it.
He broke the sphere or the tree?
He broke the tree. It's like a massive branch of the tree is missing because it turns out it's very hard to lower a giant Amazonian fig tree or whatever it is.
Well, I could have told you that.
Into your monument to ego on 6th Avenue.
Well, in this case, public opinion drove John Allen off the board.
Oh.
And he handed over control to Ed Bass. The team within the Biosphere 2 comprised of 8 people, 4 women and 4 men. They had a lot of work to do during the day, and they suffered from, over time, what it had been discovered a long time before was a problem with Antarctic research stations. You know, in Antarctica, you go there in the during the summer, the southern summer, and then you're basically frozen there, inaccessible to outsiders for the length of the southern winter.
And you leave the next summer. It's like a year posting. Is that
That's right. And what they know about Antarctica is that people often, the community there will divide into factions. The kind of proximity to other people and your dependence on them and your isolation just naturally causes emotional antagonism between people.
So it's not connections being created between different people. It's actually resentments
it is.
driving people apart. And you have 2 kinds of people, enemies and people you tolerate for now.
Right. Or I mean, any like small differences between people get amplified. It's something that's studied a lot now because of these potentially long space missions. You can't afford factionalism. And what happens is the people in various factions continue to do the work that's needed. They continue to cooperate in order to maintain the system. But their relationships decay to the point that
there's not speaking.
They don't talk to each other. They're like, they really despise
Is it
one
better
another.
if you bring in people that already know each other, or does that just can you just end marriages in Biosphere?
Well, there were people going into Biosphere 2 who were already friends and associates. I mean, they were all scientists of a kind.
Was there sex in Biosphere?
Well,
like NASA says nobody's ever had sex in space.
It seems,
and there's lots of sex in Biosphere 1. That's
it seems
what I
like
gather.
there. Well, as far as you know,
but I don't know about Biosphere 2.
There's a lot of we still have a lot of questions about what happened in Biosphere 2.
There are no babies. There are no Biosphere babies.
No Biosphere babies.
That would upset the delicate balance of life.
They were there for a couple of years. One problem was that they were not able to arrive at a sustainable oxygen production.
Too much or too little?
Too little.
Oh, well, that's not what you want.
It's not. When they started Biosphere, the environment was about 20% oxygen when they started, and that's a healthy amount of oxygen. Mm-hmm. You know, most of what we breathe is nitrogen. But over the course of the experiment, they got to a point where there was only 14% oxygen, which is the equivalent of being at about 14,000 feet.
And yet all the mammals died. Most of the oxygen breathers were gone. It was the people hogging all the oxygen, and they still didn't have enough.
Well, the plants weren't getting enough light to really photosynthesize within the system. Carbon was building up. And part of the idea of the savanna was that it would grow grasses, and they would cut them, and that would be a part of... They would then sequester carbon.
Sink carbon, yeah.
One thing that they didn't anticipate that happened, that only was discovered kind of late into the experiment, was that the concrete that was used to build the Biosphere 2 was reacting with the carbon and creating calcium carbonate within the environment.
So too much carbon. They're having a greenhouse gas problem in a literal greenhouse.
That's right.
Oh, wow.
One of the crazy things is that they actually managed to create a sustainable ocean reef system.
Like they had a coral reef?
They had a coral reef.
Wow.
And much of the science, much of the study of the coral reef of Biosphere 2 went on to inform our knowledge of coral reefs globally.
Because we've got warming seas. I mean, we've got all the same problems.
And more science was done on coral reefs in Biosphere 2 than any other place.
Wow. So it did have a little legacy.
Well, it had a considerable legacy. But what happened as the oxygen levels decreased is the idea was introduced now. Well, wait a minute. We don't want to.
They should just start killing off the humans one by one. That's my opinion.
We don't want people to die here. And the two factions of Biospherians split.
Do they have names?
They did. Well,
no, not the Biospherians, the factions.
Well, yes.
Like the Jets and the Sharks?
The factions were named after the kind of people that led them.
Team Bob and Team Greg or something?
Jane Poynter was one of the scientists, and her group believed that the benefit of Biosphere 2 was that it be an incubator for science, and they were succeeding at that. And the idea that they be sealed into this place for 2 years was not necessary for this still to be an incredible scientific environment. And she felt like that was just a publicity stunt.
But does the other team think she's insufficiently devoted to sparkle motion?
Yes. The Alling group felt like the whole idea was to create this environment. And if at the first sign of oxygen depletion, you opened up all the windows, you had effectively canceled the
Alling guys are willing to die if needs be. They're willing to suck up their own carbon dioxide to keep the purity of the results. And I admire that.
I feel like they felt like this made it even more crucial that they solve the ecosystem problems. But the news media was watching, I think in some ways hoping it would fail, looking at every detail, making sure that there was no, at one point someone had a medical emergency and had to come out through the airlock. And when they went back in, they were carrying some candy bars in their pockets or whatever. And there was a whole hullabaloo about whether or not that invalidated the science.
It depends on what kind of candy bar, I think.
That's right.
How much carbon can you sequester in nougat?
But during this same period, there were corporate level problems. The board of directors, the sort of structuring enterprise group, was also criticized for not being scientists, and although there didn't appear to be a direct profit motive, they were making decisions based on criteria other than certainly what Alling and her group thought were the
money's coming from them and from their wealthy donor class.
That's right.
And they're protective of it.
Right. In the end, they survived the 2 years, but at the cost of all of their relationships. And
they thought they were going to keep going to the lake together every year. And
at a certain point, they did start injecting oxygen in from outside. So they didn't succeed in the pure attempt to create a biosphere, a second biosphere. But and so in that sense, the Poynter group was validated. But at a certain point, Jane Poynter was such a divisive character within Biosphere 2 that the board of directors ordered her to leave, fired her.
She's been voted off the Biosphere.
She was voted off the Biosphere, but she refused to leave because she knew that in order to force her to leave, they would have to send sheriffs into the Biosphere, which would have also, ruined the experiment.
She really has them over a barrel. That's going to happen on Mars too.
Right.
A lot of these Navy guys, you set them up on another planet, and they're going to have ideas.
Sure, one of them's going to turn into a skateboarder, and they're going to be like, "Well, how do we get him out of here?" And he's going to be like doing kickflips.
Cowabunga, dudes! He keeps messing up moves while they're trying to call NASA.
So Pointer stayed in the experiment to the end, estranged from everyone, but or estranged from the people that weren't the member of her faction, and had been canceled, but
Refused to go.
Refused to go.
It's like the Seinfeld, where you just refuse to be fired.
Have you always wanted to learn to play an instrument? Maybe you've even tried at some point, but gave up because you felt lessons were too expensive or that you just didn't have the time. Thankfully, there's Musician. Musician is the fun, easy, and affordable way to learn guitar, piano, bass, ukulele, and even singing. Just download the app to your desktop, tablet, or phone and start playing. Musician gives you 24/7 access to a vast catalog of video lessons from professionally trained educators, as well as thousands of exercises and songs across dozens of music genres, all tailored to your goals. And with Musician's award-winning technology that listens to you play, you'll get real-time feedback on timing and accuracy so you can actually see yourself improving as you learn. Start your extended 14-day free trial of Musician's Premium Plus package at musician.com/start. That's unlimited access to thousands of lessons, exercises, and songs on as many instruments as you want for 2 whole weeks. Just go to musician.com/start. That's YOUSICIAN.com/start.
At the end of that experiment, Biosphere became a kind of science incubator, but then they attempted to seal it off again, having learned what they now knowing what they learned.
This is after 2 years. They're going to run it back.
Yeah.
Biosphere 2 squared.
And the idea, what Ed Bass said and what John Allen said was the first time we did this, it wasn't like it's supposed to test this perfect knowledge that we had. Like this was the first time this had been tried.
It's a work in progress.
And everyone agreed a lot of science had been accomplished there, even though it was a sort of non-governmental and also sort of not endorsed really by any university or, it wasn't peer-reviewed really.
Right.
But they were doing science.
That explains the candy bars.
In 1994, in March of 1994, they undertook a second Biosphere.
And what do you call Biosphere 2? Is it Biosphere 3? Is it Biosphere 2? The saga continues?
Yeah, okay. Biosphere 2 Electric Boogaloo. But they sealed themselves up and almost immediately began to have lots of problems with the corporate structure of the overarching enterprise. Is
this no longer Bass and Allen in charge? Or?
It's Bass still in charge, but the business end of it and then the philanthropic end of it starts to come unraveled because there are a lot of banks in play, and it's and they really didn't have any cohesion of the team as a whole.
Okay.
And so even though they'd only sealed themselves up on the 6th of March, by the 1st of April, Bass removed himself from the board and hired Steve Bannon.
Wait. A Steve Bannon or the Steve Bannon?
The Steve Bannon. To come in as head of the new, I guess, receivership organization that took over Space Biosphere's ventures.
Did he immediately kick out all the non-white Biospherians?
He immediately began looking at the project as something that he could create efficiencies by eliminating certain expenditures.
What was he? He was some finance guy back then?
Venture capitalist.
He's just some VC dork?
Just some money guy from California. And he had the trust of Ed Bass, but immediately lost the trust of all of the Biospherans. During the period of transition, the CEO of Space Ventures, a woman named Margaret Augustine, who happened to be married to the commander of the Biospherians.
The second group, the second batch?
Norberto Alvarez Romo. Norberto.
Steve Bannon's not worried about people with Hispanic names invading Biosphere?
Well, God, I'm having a hard time saying his name. Norberto left the Biosphere.
He just gets up and leaves?
Because of some unidentified medical emergency, totally not connected to the fact that his wife had just been fired as the CEO.
Wow.
And so there was, and another couple of people left, or at least one other, sort of, and was replaced by another Biosphere. And this is in the first couple of months.
Biosphere in disarray.
There was a tremendous disarray. And then Abigail Alling,
the previous we don't care that much faction,
the one that was the faction that was the most hardline.
Oh, they're like they're the don't open the windows faction,
right? Okay. She and Mark Van Thillo, who was another one of the original Biospherans, came and insisted that Steve Bannon and his group were risking the lives of the Biospherians because they were cutting necessary systems. Bannon and his group cut off all communication with the outside world and Biosphere. They changed all the passwords. So only Bannon and his team of bankers could communicate with the Biospherians.
Previously, they could speak to friends and relatives on the outside.
Well, and also the media.
Well, that's
going
to be a mutiny.
Well, except the Biospherians were being told some information that wasn't clear.
Wow.
So late at night, Abigail Alling and Mark Van Thillo show up at the Biosphere and start breaking windows.
From outside.
This
is like on a reality show when the people from the first season suddenly come back and start making trouble.
Yeah, they pry open the doors with a crowbar and start yelling inside like, "You're not safe, you're come out," or whatever. Like they're trying to.
It's like liberating monkeys from a primate research lab or something.
Right.
Except they're human monkeys.
All of this led to on June 1st of 1994, the corporation or Space Ventures was dissolved. And by September 6th of 94, just a few short months, 6 months after they went in, they came out. And Steve Bannon remained in charge of
an empty biosphere?
For another year and a half.
That's a good metaphor for him.
And eventually the Biosphere was taken over by Columbia University, who used it basically not as a enclosed Biosphere, but as
it's like a retreat center.
As a garden.
Yeah, they just.
And then it passed through several hands. It was scheduled to be turned into a retreat, like a new age. They were going to build a whole housing development around it, and it would be a tourist attraction and kind of just a skate ramp.
A lot of skateboarding in this story for you.
But in the end, it was rescued by the University of Arizona, who initially took charge of it, and then through endowments and through pledges from alumni, it became wholly owned by the University of Arizona.
And they put the volleyball team there or something? What
No,
do they do with it?
They're using it as a science center, and it has produced a tremendous amount of peer-reviewed science in the course of its existence. And I think it still has a lot of value to the scientific community as an incubator of different ideas. I mean, people are still studying coral reefs there, as crazy as that sounds, that it's in the Arizona desert, but still doing this work.
Western civilization has taught me that I should see all stories through a lens of like the destruction of hubris.
And then redemption.
Maybe, not necessarily. If it's a tragedy, there's no redemption. But is that the takeaway here from Biosphere 2? That, we were like Frankenstein. We tried to play God, and it turned out the web of life was too fragile and complex for us to try to interpret, and so we built a monster?
No.
Okay.
What the takeaway is that hubris has only proliferated. The idea of a manned mission to Mars is, you can only carry so much macaroni and cheese in your Mars spaceship. You're going to have to.
Most spaceships have zero macaroni and cheese.
Oh no, a lot of spaceships have macaroni and
The
cheese.
Millennium Falcon doesn't have macaroni and cheese.
How do you know? You don't know what's in all those compartments
Fine,
underneath.
it's not canon that the Millennium Falcon has macaroni and cheese.
What are they? I mean, they're eating something.
They're eating blue milk or something.
Yeah, blue milk, which is a necessary component of space macaroni and cheese.
I guess that's true. Maybe it's blue instead of orange.
There have been several biospheric projects and attempts. In Russia, as early as 1972, there was something called the Biosphere, which was not a closed system, but an attempt to build a functioning biosphere project. In 2007, something called the Mars 500 was also built in Russia, which was another attempt to kind of.
Oh, I thought that was a stock car race.
That's it's a candy bar. The Mars 500.
The Mars 500.
In Cornwall, England, which is down by Penzance,
Sure,
a place that you would.
Land's End, southwesternmost England.
Yeah, a place that if you're in England and they shake it, you're going to end up down in Cornwall. In 2000, a sort of Biosphere 2-like complex called the Eden Project was opened. It's a major tourist attraction, and it has like sculptures and a light show. I mean, it's still part of this family of, is this science or is this the Epcot Center? But it's a very popular place in the UK, and it again is trying to build a habitat within an interior habitat. And then there are various research stations here on Earth. There's the Flashline Arctic Research Station and the Desert Research Station in Hanksville, Utah, which I'm sure you've visited many times.
Oh man, I love going to the Maverick Quick Stop in Hanksville. I'm just kidding. I have no idea where Hanksville is.
Well, the Flashline Research Station is up in Nunavut. There's one in Antarctica. All of them trying to create environments that resemble Mars. I mean, they're located rather in Mars-like areas, and they are trying to be spacecraft where the inhabitants of these research stations will put on spacesuits and go out into these desolate. The one in the Arctic.
We're definitely on Mars. Over.
The one in the Arctic is called White Mars. Because it's
I bet Steve Bannon loves that one.
It's an Arctic desert,
It sounds like we're not ready to go to Mars. That's what I'm getting from all this.
Well,
there's no backstop. Miss Alling can't break into a Mars base if the oxygen gets low.
I think the notion of peopling Mars still relies on the idea that the astronauts would be supplied from Earth.
And it's so expensive to get stuff into orbit. That's just not feasible, right?
And so this work, I think, is continuing as indicated by all these experiments. People around the world are trying to build systems that could create oxygen-producing, food-producing, carbon-sequestering environments in extremely hostile, inhospitable land.
But for now, we're stuck here. Futurelings, we speak to you from a time when we are still imprisoned on this one little lowly planet. And I don't know what it does to your... sometimes when I'm in Hawaii, I start to get like island fever.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is too small. I've seen everything. I got to get back to the mainland.
And we're just here on a big blue marble
in space. And that concludes Biosphere 2, entry 124.IS6517, certificate number 34308, in the omnibus. Futurelings, are you unpopular? Do you pop out at parties? Please allow social media to cure all your social ills. We tried it. It didn't work. I'm kind of tempted to do a Biosphere-like project just to get away from the internet.
Well, we have one here at the Omnibus Bunker.
My son,
but we still have internet.
My son went to Lake Kavanaugh.
Oh, he did
last weekend, and he came home and he was like, it was really refreshing just not to look at a screen.
He said that as he was
for
looking
a
at his
couple
screen.
days. He said to me, but then the follow up was, how come we don't have a cabin? I was like, come on.
Busted. Why don't you have a cabin?
I don't want a cabin.
Fancy pants?
Anyway.
It'll fill up with cockroaches and invasive ants is why.
But we insisted on alienating and creating factionalism with the aid of internet applications like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. John and I were at Omnibus Project at all of them. We are individually at Ken Jennings on Twitter and at John Roderick on Twitter and Instagram.
It's important that you follow me on Twitter so that I can begin to get to within 10% of Ken's following, because I feel like I have a legitimacy issue.
Well, yeah, we are dividing up our Patreon profits according to Twitter follower share. And right now that really favors me.
So follow at John Roderick, even if you never go on Twitter. Just bulk me up.
Are you going to ask people to unfollow me as well? Because that'll double your lead if every single person switches over.
You're good on Twitter. You're hilarious there. I would never try and deprive people of your punic humor, your punic humor.
Pubic humor? I don't feel like I make puns on Twitter. I don't like puns.
No. It's very top.
And I don't like myself when I make puns. If you want to communicate directly with John and me, if you feel you have important input and a way to access us electronically, our email address was theomnibusproject@gmail.com. People send us physical items as well through the U.S. mail, which I'm sure does not exist in your era, but look at this. We just got a postcard that says Bonaparte. It's got the Bonaparte family tree.
Oh, Bonaparte.
Are you going to show your mom?
No, I don't want to infuriate her.
Here's one from Plymouth Rock. Thought you gentlemen would like a nice look at the rock.
There it is. You can see how it's cemented together.
Historic Plymouth Rock. This seems like a very old postcard. Like, I don't think this person purchased this in May 2019 when he or she visited.
They found it in a
junk store or something.
In a thrift store, yeah.
You got a baseball cap for the Rocket City Trash Pandas.
Nice.
A raccoon-themed minor league team.
Why do you say it's mine?
I think they specifically mentioned you.
That. Let me see that.
Do you know what or where Rocket City is?
What or where Rocket City is? Well, wait a minute. Wouldn't it be Houston? Where do they build?
Close.
Oh, no. Wait, I'm sorry.
You're getting there.
It's in Alabama.
That's correct. That's the Huntsville, Alabama minor league club for I don't know whom. But it's it's one of these baseball minor league teams that's trying to sell more merch by kind of memifying.
Yep.
Like that team that in Albuquerque that named their minor league team after the fictional Simpsons team.
Oh.
They renamed their minor league team the Isotopes after a single Simpsons episode. And then I think they were immediately selling more merchandise than the Mets.
Yeah, here.
That doesn't take much. That's like 3 jerseys. You can, if you want to contribute financially, I mean, one thing you could do is buy a bunch of minor league baseball merchandise and send it to John.
That doesn't help us.
Or you could pledge it to our Patreon, patreon.com/omnibus project. The show, of course, stays free and unchanged and on your feed twice a week for the foreseeable future.
You sound like me all of a sudden with your something caught in your throat.
I know. I have a lot of gravitas right now. I think it's time for me to say something emotional. John and I are so moved by all the support we've received from our listeners. Oh, the hat looks good.
Thanks.
Very nice. Very nice. But with the headphones over it, you kind of look like, I don't know.
I look like the helicopter or the pilot, the helicopter pilot from the A-Team.
Yeah, I thought are you going to do the traffic updates? It's kind of an Alex Jones quality, actually.
It's not what I want.
So patreon.com/omnibus project to support the show. You can, did I say the address for mailing us physical stuff?
I'm not sure.
All this stuff got to us because someone sent it to P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington, 98155. If what you're looking for is a good time, and really, who among us is not?
Heard that.
We can recommend the Futurelings Facebook group, where listeners of the show congregate in this era, and it's Reddit equivalent, some subreddit called, what did you say, Omnibus_project?
Yeah, or a podcast.
Or Omnibus_podcast and then Futurelings. I think. We're trying to get that going. Right now it's kind of a struggling little Reddit biosphere.
If you're a
Redditor. Got too many goats.
Yeah, if you're a Redditor, you could find these two places. And I'm hoping that the two factions will reunite and form one subreddit, because I have no idea why 300 people over here would need to be discussing something 300 people over there couldn't.
Yeah, what happened? What schism happened to divide the omnibus listeners of Reddit? I don't know. I bet it seemed like a pretty big deal at the time. That's my experience with subreddit drama.
Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, when we were confined to 1.5 biospheres, we have no idea how long our civilization survived, but we hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come, and we are forced to retreat to our refugia.
I'm going to go to Oracle, Arizona, and head into Biosphere. Well, I mean, is it radiation proof?
Is
it
and a lot of other
proof?
fools. No, I don't think so.
I'm going to be the only one who remembers. There's not a lot of Biosphere awareness in our era. You know, if you lived through it, it was to cover a Newsweek stuff.
Right.
And now nobody remembers. I think I'm going to be the only one there.
Well, yeah, maybe. Oh, you and some University of Arizona undergraduates, which sounds pretty good to me.
I'm going to repopulate the Earth with the University of Arizona women's volleyball team.
If the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may be our final word. But if Providence, in the form of John Allen, allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.